Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Granite Theatre's production of Trifles. Nebraska, 1920s. The kitchen in the now abandoned farmhouse of John Wright. A gloomy kitchen, and left without having been put in order. Unwashed pans under the sink. A loaf of bread outside the bread box. A dish towel on the table. Other signs of incompleted work. At the rear, the outer door opens, and the sheriff comes in, followed by the county attorney and Hale. The sheriff and Hale are men in middle life. The county attorney is a young man. All are much bundled up and go at once to the stove. They are followed by the two women. The sheriff's wife first. She is a slight, wiry woman, a thin, nervous face. Mrs. Hale is larger and would ordinarily be called more comfortable looking, but she is disturbed now and looks fearfully about as she enters. The county attorney approaches the wood stove.
This feels good. Come up to the fire, ladies.
Oh, I'm not cold.
Now, Mr. Hale, before we move things about, you explain to Mr. Henderson just what you saw when you came here yesterday morning?
By the way, has anything been moved? Are things just as you left them yesterday?
Oh, it's just the same. When it dropped below zero last night, I thought I'd better send Frank out this morning to make a fire for us. No use getting pneumonia with a big case on, but I told him not to touch anything except the stove. And you know Frank.
Somebody should have been left here yesterday.
Oh, yesterday. When I had to send Frank to Morris Center for that man who went crazy? I want you to know I had my hands full yesterday. I knew you could get back from Omaha by today, and as long as I went over everything here myself,
Well, Mr. Hale, tell just what happened when you came here yesterday morning.
Harry and I had started to town with a load of potatoes. We came along the road from my place, and as I got here, I said, I'm going to see if John Wright can go in with me on a party telephone. I'd spoke to Mr. Wright about it once before, but he put me off, saying folks talk too much anyway, and all he asked for was a bit of peace and quiet. I guess you all know how much he talked himself, but I thought maybe if I went to the house and talked about it before his wife, though I said to Harry that I didn't know what his wife wanted, made much difference to John.
Let's talk about that later, Mr. Hale. I do want to talk about that, but tell now just what happened when you got to the house.
I didn't hear or see anything. I knocked at the door, and still it was all quiet inside. I knew they must be up. It was past 8 o'clock, so I knocked again. And I thought I heard somebody say, come in. I wasn't sure. I'm not sure yet, but I opened the door, this door, and there in that rocker sat Mrs. Wright.
What was she doing?
She's just rocking back and forth. and she had her apron in her hand and was kind of pleating at it.
And how did she look?
Well, she looked queer.
How do you mean queer?
Well, as if she didn't know what she was going to do next. All kind of done up.
How did she seem to feel about your coming?
I don't think she minded, one way or t'other. She didn't pay much attention. I said, "How do, Mrs. Wright? It's cold, ain't it?" And she said, "Is it?" I went on kind of pleating at her apron. Well, I was surprised she didn't ask me to come up to the stove or sit down or anything, but just sat there, not even looking at me. So I said, "I want to see John." And then she laughed. I guess you could call it a laugh. I thought of Harry and the team outside, so I said a little sharp, "Can't I see John?" "No," says she, kind of dull like. "Ain't he home?" says I. "Yes," says she, "he's home." "Then why can't I see him?" I asked her, out of patience. "'Cause he's dead," says she. "Dead," says I. She just nodded her head, not getting a bit excited, but rocking back and forth. "Why, where is he?" says I, not knowing what to say. But she just pointed upstairs. So I got up. Then I says, "Why, what did he die of?" "He died of a rope around his neck," says she. Just went on pleating at her apron. Well, I went out and called Harry. I thought I might need some help. And we went upstairs, and there he was, just lying.
I think I'd rather have you go into that upstairs where you can point it all out. Just go on now with the rest of your story.
Well, my first thought was to get that rope off. It looked... But Harry, he went up to him and he said, "Nope, he's dead all right, and we better not touch anything." So we went back downstairs. She was still sitting that way. "Has anybody been notified?" I asked. "No," says she, unconcerned. "Who did this, Mrs. Wright?" said Harry. He said it all businesslike. She stopped pleating at her apron. "I don't know," says she. "You don't know," says Harry. "No," says she. "Weren't you sleeping in the bed next to him?" says Harry. "Yes," says she. "But I was on the inside." "Somebody slipped a rope around his neck and strangled him to death, and you didn't wake up," says Harry. "I didn't wake up," she said after him. Well, we must have looked as if we didn't see how that could be, for after a minute she said, "I sleep sound." Harry was going to ask more questions, but I said maybe we ought to let her tell her story to the coroner or the sheriff. So Harry went fast as he could over Rivers' place. They got a telephone.
And what did Mrs. Wright do when she knew that you had gone to the coroner?
She moved from that chair to that one over there and just sat there with her hands held together and looking down. I got a feeling that I ought to make some conversation, so I said I had come to see if John wanted to put in a telephone, and at that she started to laugh. And then she stopped and looked at me, scared. I don't know, maybe it wasn't scared. I wouldn't like to say it was. Soon Harry got back, then Dr. Lloyd came, and you, Mr. Peters, and so I guess that's all I know that you don't.
Well, I guess we'll go upstairs first, and then out to the barn and around there. You are convinced that there was nothing important here, nothing that could point to any motive.
Nothing here but kitchen things.
The county attorney, after looking around the kitchen, opens the door of a cupboard closet. He gets up on a chair and looks on a shelf, pulls his hand away, sticky.
Here's a nice mess.
Oh, her fruit. It did freeze. She worried about that when it turned so cold. She said the fire'd go out and her jars would break.
Oh, can you beat the women? Held for murder, worrying about her preserves.
I guess before we're through, she may have something more serious than preserves to worry about.
Well, the women are used to worrying over trifles.
And yet, for all their worries, what would we do without the ladies?
He goes to the sink, takes a dipperful of water from the pail, and pouring it into a basin, washes his hands, starts to wipe them on the dish towel, sees it's dirty, and tries to find a clean one.
Dirty towels. Not much of a housekeeper, would you say, ladies?
There's a great deal of work to be done on a farm.
To be sure. And yet, I know there are some Dixon County farmhouses which do not have such dirty towels.
Towels get awful dirty quickly. Men's hands aren't as clean as they should be.
Ah, loyal to your sex, I see. But you and Mrs. Wright were neighbors. I suppose you were friends too?
Well, I've not seen much of her lately. It's been, it's been more than a year since I've been in this house.
And why was that? You didn't like her?
Oh, I liked her well enough. Farmers' wives have their hands full, Mr. Henderson. And then,
Yes.
well, it just never seemed a very cheerful place.
No, it's not cheerful. I shouldn't say she had the homemaking instinct.
Well, I don't know as Mr. Wright had either.
You mean that they didn't get on very well?
Oh, no, I don't mean anything like that, but I don't think a place be any cheerfuler if with John Wright being in it.
I'd like to talk more on that a little later. I want to get the lay of the things upstairs now.
I suppose anything Mrs. Peters does will be all right. She was to take in some clothes for her, and a few things. We left in such a hurry yesterday.
Yes, but I would like to see what you take, Mrs. Peters, and keep an eye out for anything that might be of use to us.
Oh, yes, Mr. Henderson.
I'd hate to have men coming into my kitchen snooping around and criticizing.
Of course, it's no more than their duty.
Well, duty's all right, but I guess that deputy sheriff came out and he made a fire and he might have gotten some soot on these towels. I wish I'd seen that sooner. Seems mean to talk about her for not having things slicked up when they took her away such a hurry. Oh, it's a shame about her fruit. I wonder if it's all gone. I think there's some up here that's all right. Mrs. Peters? Yes, here. This is cherries too. I declare, I believe that's the only one.
Gets down, bottle in her hand, goes to the sink and wipes it off on the outside.
Oh, she'll feel awful bad after all that hard work and that hot weather. Huh. I remember the day I put up my cherries last summer.
Well, I must get those things from the front room closet. Are you coming with me, Mrs. Hale? You could help me carry them.
They go in the other room, reappear, Mrs. Peters carrying a dress and skirt, Mrs. Hale following with a pair of shoes.
Oh, my, it's cold in there.
Wright was close. I think maybe that's why she kept so much to herself. She didn't even belong to the Ladies' Aid. I suppose if she felt like she couldn't do her part and then you don't enjoy things when you feel shabby. Oh, she used to wear such pretty clothes and so lively when she was Minnie Foster. One of the town girls singing in the choir. That was 30 years ago. Is this what you found?
She said she wanted an apron. Funny thing to want, for there isn't much to get you dirty in jail, goodness knows. But I suppose just to make her feel more natural. She said they was in the top drawer in the cupboard. Oh, and then her little shawl that always hung behind the door.
Opens stair door and looks.
Oh, yes. Here it is.
Quickly shuts door leading upstairs.
Mrs. Peters,
Yes, Mrs. Hale.
do you think she did it?
Oh, I don't know.
Oh, well, I don't think she did. Asking for an apron and a little shawl, worrying about her fruit.
Mr. Peters says it looks bad for her. Mr. Henderson is awful sarcastic in a speech, and he'll make fun of her saying she didn't wake up.
Well, I guess John Wright didn't wake up when they were slipping a rope around his neck.
No, it's strange. It must have been done awful crafty and still. They say it was a funny way to kill a man, rigging it all up like that.
That's just what Mr. Hale said. There was a gun in the house, and he says that's what he can't understand.
Mr. Henderson said, coming out, that what was needed for the case is a motive, something to show anger or sudden feeling.
Well, I don't see any signs of anger around here. Oh, I wonder how they're finding things upstairs. I hope she had a little more time to tidy up there. You know, it seems kind of sneaky, locking her up in town and then coming out here and trying to turn her house against her.
Well, Mrs. Hale, the law is the law.
I suppose 'tis. Well, better loosen up your things, Mrs. Peters. You won't feel them when you go out.
Mrs. Peters takes off her fur tippet, stands looking at the under part of the small corner table.
Oh, look, she was piecing a quilt.
She brings the large sewing basket and they look at the bright pieces.
Oh, it's a log cabin pattern. Pretty, isn't it? I wonder if she was going to quilt it or knot it.
The sheriff enters, followed by Hale and the county attorney.
They wonder if she was going to quilt it or just knot it.
Well, Frank's fire didn't do much up there, did it? Well, let's go out to the barn and get that cleared up.
I don't know as there's anything so strange or taking up our time with little things while we're waiting for them to find evidence. I don't see that it's anything to laugh about.
Of course, they've got awful important things on their minds.
Mrs. Peters, look at this one. This one she was working on, and look at the sewing. All the rest of it's been so nice and even, and look at this one. It's all over the place. Why, it looks as if she didn't know what she was about.
What are you doing, Mrs. Hale?
Oh, just pulling out a stitch or two that's not sewed so well. Bad sewing always makes me fidgety.
I don't think we ought to touch things.
I'll just finish up this end. Mrs. Peters,
Yes, Mrs. Hale.
what do you suppose she was so nervous about?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know if she was nervous. I mean, I can sew awful queer when I'm just tired. Well, I must get these things wrapped up. They might be through sooner than we think. I wonder where I can find a piece of paper and some string.
In that cupboard, maybe?
Why, look. There's a bird cage. Did she have a bird, Mrs. Hale?
Why, I don't know whether she did or not. I've not been here for so long. There was a man around last year selling canaries cheap, but I don't know if she took one. Maybe she did. She used to sing real pretty herself.
Seems funny to think of a bird here. But she must have had one. Why else would she have a cage? I wonder what happened to it.
I suppose maybe the cat got it.
Oh, no, she didn't have a cat. She's got that feeling that some people have about cats, you know, being afraid of them. My cat got in her room and she got real upset about it and asked me to get it out.
My sister Bessie was like that. Queer, ain't it?
Why, look at this door. It's broke. One hinge is pulled apart.
It looks as if, maybe somebody's been rough with it.
Yes.
She brings the cage forward and puts it on the table.
I wish if they were going to find any evidence, they'd be about it. I don't like this place.
But I'm awful glad you came with me, Mrs. Hale. It would be lonesome for me sitting here alone.
It would, wouldn't it? But I tell you, I do wish, Mrs. Peters, I wish I had come over sometime when she was here. I wish I had.
But of course you were awful busy, Mrs. Hale, with your house, your children.
I could have come. I stayed away because it wasn't cheerful, and that's why I ought to have come. I've never liked this place. Maybe because it's down in a hollow and you can't see the road. I don't know what it is, but it's a lonesome place and always was. I wish I had come over to see Minnie Foster sometimes. I can see now I just should have gone.
Mrs. Hale, you mustn't reproach yourself. Somehow we just don't know how it is with other people until something happens.
Not having children makes less work, but it makes a quiet house. And Wright, out to work all day and no company when he came in. Did you know John Wright, Mrs. Peters?
Not to know him. I've seen him in town. They say he was a good man.
Yes, good. He didn't drink, and he kept his word as well as most, I guess, and paid his debts. But he was a hard man, Mrs. Peters. Just to pass the time of day with him, ugh, like a raw wind that gets into the bone. I should have think she would have wanted a bird. But what do you suppose it went with it?
I don't know, unless it got sick and died.
She reaches over and swings the broken door. Swings it again. Both women watch it.
You weren't raised around here, were you? You didn't know her.
Not till they brought her yesterday.
Come to think of it, she was kind of a little bird herself. Real sweet and pretty, but kind of timid and fluttery. Oh, how she did change. Tell you what, Mrs. Peters, why don't you take the quilt in with you? It might take up her mind.
I think that is a real nice idea, Mrs. Hale, and there couldn't possibly be any objection to it, could there? Now, just what would I take? Oh, I wonder if her patches are in here and her things.
Oh, here's some red. I
Ooh.
expect this has got sewing things in it. What a pretty box. Looks like something somebody would give you. Oh, maybe her scissors are in here.
Oh, this
Why?
isn't scissors.
That's something wrapped up in pieces of silk.
Oh,
Oh, Mrs. Peters,
it's the bird.
oh, but Mrs. Peters, look at it. Look at its neck. Look at it.
Somebody wrung its neck.
Oh, the other side too.
Mrs. Hale slips box under quilt pieces.
Well, ladies, have you decided whether she was going to quilt it or not it?
We think she was going to knot it.
Well, that's interesting, I'm sure. A bird cage. Has the bird flown?
We think the cat got it.
Is there a cat?
Well, not now. They're superstitious, you know. They leave.
No sign at all of anyone having come from the outside, their own rope. So let's go up again and go over it piece by piece. It would have to have been someone who knew just the right.
Oh, she liked the bird. She was going to bury it in that pretty box.
When I was a girl, my kitten, there was a boy who took a hatchet, and before my eyes, and before I could get there, if they hadn't held me back, I would have hurt him.
I wonder how it would seem to never have had any children around. No, Wright wouldn't like a bird, a thing that sang. She used to sing. He killed that too.
We don't know who killed the bird.
I knew John Wright.
It was an awful thing was done in this house that night, Mrs. Hale. Killing a man while he slept, slipping a rope around his neck that choked the life out of him.
His neck choked the life out of him.
We don't know who killed him. Well, we don't know.
If there'd been years and years of nothing, then a bird to sing to you, it would be awful still. After the bird was still.
I know what stillness is. When we homesteaded in Dakota, and my first baby died after he was 2 years old, and me with no other then.
How soon do you suppose they'll be through looking for the evidence?
I know what stillness is. The law has got to punish crime, Mrs. Hale.
I wish you'd seen Minnie Foster when she wore a white dress and blue ribbons and stood up there in the choir and sang. Oh, I wish I'd come over once in a while. That was a crime. That was a crime. And who's going to punish that?
We mustn't take on.
I might have known she needed help. I know how things can be for women. I tell you, it's queer, Mrs. Peters. We live close together and we live far apart. We all go through the same things. It's still the different kind of the same thing. If I was you, I wouldn't tell her that her fruit was gone. Tell her it ain't. Tell her it's all right. Take this to prove it to her. She may never know whether it was broke or not.
Takes the bottle and looks about for something to wrap it in. Takes petticoat from the clothes brought from the other room. Very nervously begins winding this around the bottle.
It's a good thing the men couldn't hear us. I mean, wouldn't they just laugh? Getting all stirred up over a little thing like a dead canary. As if that could have anything to do with, well, wouldn't they just laugh?
The men are heard coming downstairs.
Maybe they would and maybe they wouldn't.
No, Peters, it's all perfectly clear except for a reason for doing it. But you know juries when it comes to women. If there was some definite things, something to show, something to make a story about, a thing that would connect up with this strange way of doing it.
Hey, I got the team around. It's cold out there.
I'm going to stay here a while by myself. You can send Frank out for me, can't you? I want to go over everything. I'm not satisfied that we can't do better.
You want to see what Mrs. Peters is going to take in?
Oh, I guess they're not very dangerous things the ladies have picked out.
Moves a few things about, disturbing the quilt pieces which cover the box. Steps back.
No, Mrs. Peters doesn't need supervising. For that matter, a sheriff's wife is married to the law. Ever think of it that way, Mrs. Peters?
Not just that way.
Married to the law. I just want you to come here a minute, George. We ought to take a look at these windows.
Oh, windows.
We'll be right out, Mr. Hale.
Suddenly, Mrs. Peters throws back quilt pieces and tries to put the box in her purse. The box is too big. She opens the box, starts to take the bird out, but cannot touch it herself. She goes to pieces and stands there helpless. The women hear the men returning. Mrs. Hale snatches the box and puts it in the pocket of her big coat.
Well, Henry, at least we found out that she was not going to quilt it. She was going to, what is it you call it, ladies?
We call it not it, Mr. Henderson.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us for this production of Trifles Live. And now, the cast of Trifles. As our county attorney, George Henderson.
Austin Venditelli.
As Sheriff Henry Peters.
Marc Vakassian.
As Lewis Hale.
Mark Bernier.
As Mrs. Peters.
Darla Allen.
And as Mrs. Hale.
Diana Blanda.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank
Have
you.
a great
Good
night.
night.
Coming out tonight. Props to Swamp Crew.
Have a great night.
Ladies and gentlemen, we want to thank you for attending our production of Trifles. We also want to wish a happy birthday to our county attorney, George Henderson. Happy birthday, Austin. We hope to see you online next month. Thank you and good night.